Well, I make that 1 minute past the hour, so let's get started. We don't want everybody, waiting for the late arrivals forever. So let's just start with a couple of introductory things. I am Lee Briggs. I'm a developer advocate here at Pulumi. Today, we're going to be doing some straightforward introductions to the Pulumi tool and Google Cloud specifically. You should have got an email yesterday that kind of detailed a few setup steps that you should have hopefully had a chance to do. If you did get a chance to do those setup steps, you will be able to follow along with me and type out the actual infrastructure as code configuration as we go along. If you did not have a chance to set up those, to do that prerequisite work, I will be sharing a link with you so that you can join me in VS Code live share and actually take a look at what I'm doing. So hopefully, regardless of the preparation that you've had a chance to do for this workshop, you'll be able to get an idea of what it's like to actually use Paloomi and use the tool. We have changed the format of these kind of workshop webinars. Previously, we did a bunch of slides and a bunch of introduction. I want to get people's hands on keyboards as fast as possible. So we've changed it up a little bit, and it's a little bit less formal. It's a little bit less, the idea is that we're just going to kind of take you through some of the basics of what Paloomi does. And so this is, this is supposed to be an organic type thing. I will probably make mistakes, but we'll figure out those mistakes together. And so it's not a polished type event. I'm not here to kind of sell you on the tool. I'm here to get your hands on the keyboard and actually using it. So with all that in mind, let's get started. There's a couple of things that we need to do before we're actually diving into our IDE. So what we're going to do is very quickly, I'm going to guide you through the process of creating a Pulumi account if you haven't already done so. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to set up my environment and get my IDE up and running so that we can, we can actually start writing some code and doing some Google Cloud stuff. So hopefully everyone's excited, but let's get started. I'm just going to set up my screen sharing. Bear with me 1 second. And it looks like screen sharing is enabled. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. I'm also going to turn off the video. I've had some problems in the past with my internet bandwidth, so I'm going to turn off the video so you don't have to see my my lovely face this morning or this evening, depending on where you are. But if anybody does want to ask any questions, I'm quite happy to turn that back on. So let's turn that off, and hopefully everyone can see my screen. So first things first, we need to set up a Pulumi account. And so you'll see that I'm logged into GitHub as my Briggs Pulumi user. And this is recommended if you have a GitHub account. What we're going to be doing is using our GitHub account as our identity provider to kind of configure our Pulumi user. So what we'll do is we'll head to www.paloomi.com. I understand that's probably not the biggest, the best text size. So let's zoom in a little bit. So paloomi.com, in the top right hand corner, you'll see a couple of links such as Docs and Slack. What I'd like you to do, if you haven't set up a Pulumi account, just hit the sign in button here, which should open a new page. And then you should be presented with these 4 options to actually sign into Pulumi. I would highly recommend, if you do have a GitHub account, using GitHub to actually sign up for your account. All Pulumi accounts are, as you can see here, free forever for individual use. So we'll be doing individual Pulumi projects today. So you get a free Pulumi account. It's not going to cost you anything. You're not going to have to put in a credit card. And so I would highly recommend getting this done at this point so that you can kind of get started and get provisioning infrastructure any minute now. So I'm going to click on this GitHub link. And it should take you to this GitHub page, which is asking you to authorize the Pulumi console. We need access to your GitHub email address so that we can actually verify your identity. And we also need read-only access to your GitHub repos, your organizations and teams. Palumi's web service kind of shows you some visualizations on your GitHub account when you actually push Pulumi code to your GitHub repos. So we only need read-only access. all of the work that Pulumi does to provision resources in Google Cloud is done locally on your machine. We never need any kind of credentials from you at all. And so this is all read-only. The Pulumi console doesn't need access to anything and doesn't need write access to anything in your Google Cloud account. So I'm going to hit Authorize Pulumi, like so. And you should get taken to a page like this, which means that you have successfully set up your Pulumi account. So you are now ready to get started with Pulumi and actually start provisioning resources. There is a final thing that you need to do on your local machine, though. I'm just going to take my watch off because it's annoying me. There is a final thing that you need to do on your local machine, though, and you need to log in as that user. And so what we're going to do now, I'm going to very quickly guide you through what that looks like. Let me switch to the screen. There we go. So on your local machine, you should have a Pulumi command line interface if you have installed it already. If you haven't installed it, then there are instructions. If you head to Pulumi.com and look at the Get Started documentation, on the left-hand side here, there is a download and install set of instructions, which I will post in the chat so that everybody can see it. But you need to have this command line interface installed. How this works is Pulumi will locally provision your resources, and then it will tell this Pulumi console here, it will tell the Pulumi console what the result of provisioning those resources are. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we kind of get into actually writing some code. So make sure you've got the Pulumi command line installed, and then what you need to do is type Pulumi login. And you can see I'm already logged into my account. When you type Pulumi login, it will give you, it should open a web browser for you on your local machine, which will guide you through kind of setting things up. I'm not going to go through that process again because I don't want to break break my environment. So you just need to make sure you type the Pulumi login command, and it should open a browser and ask you to sign in again to Pulumi. And you should be able to kind of click through those screens, and you will be ready to go to actually provision Pulumi code. I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to actually do that. So I'm just going to wait a second, just take a quick pause, make sure everybody's kind of logged in and ready to go. If you are planning on following along with us and actually kind of provisioning stuff together. If you don't want to do that, as I already mentioned, then what I'll do in a few minutes is I'll be sharing access to my IDE. We can do, you can actually follow along by logging into the IDE as well. So I'll get that set up, and we'll wait for everybody to make sure that we'll make sure everybody is getting to a place where they can actually join us. Okay, I just sent a link in the chat. It's also in the handouts tab within Big Marker. So there is a link, a read-only link to my Visual Code live environment. If you want to follow along with me and watch the kind of things and watch what I'm doing, then feel free to just open that link, and you should be able to actually see as I'm typing things out. You should be able to actually look at my environment and be able to actually get an idea of what's happening and what's going on while I'm provisioning, things. So just take a second, make sure anybody who wants to join in has that opportunity, and then we'll get started. Then we can start actually provisioning some infrastructure using infrastructure as code. Allow. It's probably not going to work. There we go. If you are trying to use the link and it isn't working, please let us know in Big Marker, and I can make sure that's going to get sorted and taken care of. There we go. Okay, let's get started, shall we? Let's actually provision some infrastructure as code. So we have in our terminal here, we have this Git repo, which I have configured for you. The link is in the handouts. I'm going to bring it up again on the page here. So it's at, that's not the right one. There we go. So here's the link to the actual content of the actual workshop today. So there's a couple things that I want to bring your attention to. The first is there's this www root directory, which contains 4 files. It contains an index.html, which is just a very, very simple web app. It contains a 404 page, and it also contains a Docker file, which is just an Nginx Docker file, which copies all of the configuration into the Docker image. And then also there is a Nginx configuration, which actually serves the index page. What we're going to be doing over the course of this workshop is we're going to use 2 Google Cloud services to provision this application, this really, really simple, straightforward application. So first, we're going to provision this as a static site using Google Cloud Storage. And then after that, we're going to build this Docker file, and we're going to push it to Google Cloud Image Registry, and we're going to use Google's Cloud Run. The idea here is just to get you an idea of what using Google Cloud Platform with Palumi's TypeScript SDK looks like. So we're not going to be building anything too elaborate today. We're not going to be building anything, a huge multi-dimensional, microservice architecture. It's just kind of, the idea is just to get you used to what using Paloomi looks like. And so we've got 3 what we call labs. The first one's relatively simple. We're going to create a new project and install some dependencies. The second one, we're actually going to deploy a static website. So as I already mentioned, we're going to upload those HTML files to a Google Cloud Storage bucket. And then finally, we're going to use Google Cloud Run to actually config, to actually run our application again. So those are going to be the 3 steps. It's probably going to take us about an hour, maybe a little bit longer. It may end up not taking that long. And I've just noticed I've typoed the title. Look at this. If you want to send a pull request to fix that, then please feel free to do that. So we're going to kind of do that in that order. So we're going to set up our project, and then we're going to provision these static files to a Google Cloud bucket, storage bucket, and then we're going to provision a Docker image with Google Cloud Run. And hopefully that will give you an idea of what using Paloomi looks like. So let's get started. The first thing that I want you to do, if you are following along, is fork or clone this repo, and then clone it to your local machine. So you'll see I have it cloned locally here, and what we're going to do within this particular directory. Sorry, my brain just switched off for a second there. What we're going to be doing here is we're just going to create a new directory using the make directory command. So if you are familiar with this, we're going to do mk directory or mkdir, my first GCP app, like so. Paloomi needs an empty directory in order to actually bootstrap projects. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the Paloomi new command to actually populate this directory. So we need to navigate into it using the cd command, my first GCP app. And I'll verify that this is an empty directory to make sure there's nothing in here. And so what we obviously know that we want to provision something with Paloomi. So we're going to bootstrap what we call a Paloomi project. And we're going to do that using the Paloomi new command. So I'm going to type Paloomi new and hit enter. And you'll see that it actually, if you hit enter at this point, you have a bunch of different, templates that you can use to actually, get started. So we're going to be using TypeScript today. We're going to be using TypeScript with Google Cloud. You can see there's a bunch of different options here. Generally, you would just kind of choose the one you want. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to actually do this from scratch. So I wanted to show you the Paloomi new command and all the options that you have available. But what you can also do is just exit out of that or select it if you want. But I'm going to exit out and put Paloomi new TypeScript, like so. Then it will prompt you for some options. So it's going to ask you for a project name. By default, the project name is the name of the directory that you created. So our project name is going to be my first GCP app. So I'm going to hit enter and use that as the default. The second thing it's going to prompt you for is a description. Descriptions are really useful because it allows you to actually put some information in there. Perhaps if you collaborate with colleagues is a great example. You put some information in there about what is actually happening within this project. This is probably likely your first project, or you certainly haven't got a whole bunch of them. So you can just maybe use the default for this particular workshop. So we're going to do a minimal TypeScript Pulumi application. The next thing that it's going to ask you for is a stack name. Stacks are a mechanism within Pulumi to reuse your code in different configuration environments. I'm not going to be going through stacks today. If you are interested in getting started with stacks and understanding them, we do an introduction to Pulumi workshop, which will allow you to kind of get hands-on with what stacks are and how they work. Mainly we're going to use the dev stack today. We're not going to be switching between stacks for this particular workshop. So you can just use the default dev. And then once you've kind of populated all these values, Pulumi will go ahead and take care of bootstrapping the project for you. If you are a TypeScript developer, if you used a bunch of TypeScript before, if you've done a bunch of React work, this is very similar to what Create React app does. It's going to install all of the dependencies that you actually need and populate the directory so that it has everything that you need in it. So if we take a look at this, you'll see there's a bunch of different files in here now. We have node modules because we're doing TypeScript, so we need to install all our dependencies. We have an index.ts, which is where our Pulumi code is going to go. We have a package.json, which is because this is obviously a TypeScript program. It has all of our dependencies in a package.json. And then finally, the one that you might not be familiar with is this Pulumi.yaml file. This is just going to contain information about the Pulumi project that you've created. So for example, it's going to say my first GCP app, which is the name of the project that we created. You'll see the description that we selected there is in here. And then there's also the actual runtime. So as you may know, Pulumi supports a variety of different language SDKs. So we need to actually tell Pulumi, the Pulumi command line interface, which of those runtimes we are going to use. So in this particular case, we're going to be doing Node.js today. If we had created a Python application, it would say Python. If it was going to be Go, it would have Go. And so this is the only thing that's kind of different from a standard TypeScript, a standard TypeScript project. Take a quick pause there, make sure everybody's up to date. If there is any problems, I do have Zach with me today helping out in the chat. So please feel free to ask any questions, or if you're stuck at any point, we've got Zach on hand to help out. And if there's anything that Zach thinks that is going to be useful or relevant for the whole group, he will kind of chime in and say we have a question from the chat. This is supposed to be interactive, so please feel free to kind of jump in with questions in the chat at any point. I'll take a quick pause there, make sure everybody's got their Pulumi project bootstrapped, and then we'll keep going. Okay. I just want to make sure before we continue, I did mention in the email that we sent out that you are going to need to be authenticated to Google Cloud to actually kind of follow along today. So what I just recommend everybody do is very quickly type gcloud auth list like so, and you can see this will show you the credentialed accounts, and you'll see that I have an active account here just to make sure that you are kind of up and running. And then also, you should all have a project, a Google Cloud project configured within your environment. We're going to be setting that in a few moments. I want to make sure that everybody is, has a project up and running. So what we need to do at this stage is actually configure Paloomi and tell Paloomi which project we're going to actually use to deploy all of our infrastructure to. The way that we do that is we use the Pulumi config command. So I'm going to just quickly get this out of my history. You can see here there is a Pulumi config set configuration command, and we're going to set the GCP project. My project is called lbriggs, so that's obviously the one I'm specifying. What you should do is use the project name that you have available to you. So If you want to take a look at where this is, if you want to just copy this command rather than type it out, you can see it's step 5 at the end of the first lab here. So make sure that you've set your Google Cloud project, and I'm going to hit enter like so. And what that actually does, if we take a look inside our directory, you'll see that a new file has appeared. We have this pulumi.dev.yaml. This is where stacks come in. So if you wanted to provision infrastructure to multiple projects, you can set a project per stack. And if I have a look at this command, if I open it up, you can see that it's got this GCP project configuration setting, which is specific to this dev stack. So if I created a new stack, I could have a different project, which is really useful because obviously with infrastructure as code, you want to make sure that things are repeatable and you're doing things over and over, and that it's easy to provision between your development and your production environment. And so stacks will allow you to do that. It makes it easy to actually, it makes it easy to actually reuse the code that you have over and over again. And so make sure that you've kind of configured your GCP project like so, and you've configured it, and there should be a pulumi.dev.yaml. Okay, one more piece of setup that we need to do before we actually start writing code. We actually need to install the mechanism that Pulumi uses to talk to Google Cloud. And the way that we do that is using the package manager for our language of choice. So we will use NPM, one of the more popular parts of the package management ecosystem in the JavaScript community. Obviously, if you prefer to use Yarn, you could use Yarn instead, but we highly recommend NPM. And so what we're going to do is type npm install @pulumi/GCP. And what this will do is it installs the Node.js node module for Pulumi GCP so that you can actually start writing code for your Google Cloud provider. If you have used other infrastructure as code tools, this is where Pulumi differentiates itself. So we will use the standard language ecosystem instead of kind of a custom language or a custom mechanism to install these providers. We just use the language ecosystem that you are already using in your application development lifecycle. If you're a JavaScript programmer, you've probably used NPM hundreds of times perhaps by now. And again, you're just using those same mechanisms that you would normally use inside your application lifecycle. So we're using NPM to install our Google Cloud dependency, and we're just kind of running it, and it's going to get set up within our project. And so we should be able to see that in our package.json, you'll see that we've added a new dependency for GCP, and it's kind of constrained it to the 5.8.0 version of the GCP Google Cloud provider. And this allows us, now we're ready with a simple npm install, we're now ready to actually provision things in our GCP, in our GCP account, which I think is really awesome, especially if you're like a front-end developer and you are kind of getting started with infrastructure as code. This is really, really helpful because you're not kind of having to learn a whole new ecosystem and a whole new set of tools. Oh, sorry, I was on the other thing there. Hopefully, if that should have accepted. I'm doing two things at once here. So, great to see the people are joining in with the VS Code option as well. I'll just wait a minute to make sure everyone's up and running. If you do want to join the session, it's in the actual chat. So just click on that link, and you should be able to actually see, join my VS Code live share too. Okay, so let's take a look at our open editors, at our open files. So you can see here, we've got a new directory within my first GCP app, like so. And so what we're going to want to do is, let me get my words right. What we're going to want to do here is open up our index.ts file so that we can actually start writing some Paloomi code. So let's open that up. I'm going to just quickly zoom in a little bit so that everybody can get a better view. There we go. Hopefully that is nice and viewable for everybody. So this is a bare bones Paloomi program. We haven't actually imported our GCP provider yet. And so you can see I've imported the Paloomi SDK by default. When we do a Paloomi new, that just kind of takes care of it for you. But we want to provision things in Google Cloud. So the next thing that we want to do is do import all as GCP from at Pulumi GCP, like so. So this is going to import the actual Pulumi SDK for Google Cloud into our project, which will allow us to actually provision things within Pulumi. And again, it's using standard TypeScript. There's nothing special about this at all. If you have written TypeScript before, this will seem familiar to you. So, if you have created React applications is a great example. This is all the same workflow and the same thing, but we're going to use it for our infrastructure as code instead. And that's the end of the first lab. So the first lab is just getting you set up, it's getting you installed, getting everything available and ready to you, making sure that you have the project set correctly, installing the GCP provider, and then we took a look around our new project and looked at all the different files in there just to verify that it's basically an NPM, it's an NPM project. Take a quick pause there, make sure everybody's up to date. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move on to lab 2. We're going to actually create our static website. So you can just hit this link at the bottom if you are following along. And you'll see there's a bunch of code in here. I wrote this last night and this morning, so there may be a few mistakes in there. We'll figure it out together. I wanted to make this feel like just as much as I wanted to make this feel like it was just us creating infrastructure together. So there may be a few mistakes in here, but we'll hopefully get an idea of what the actual workflow for provisioning Google Cloud resources looks like. Okay. So we already talked about what we're going to be doing. We're going to be provisioning a Google Cloud storage bucket, and then we're going to upload some content to it to make a static website. And so let's go ahead and do that. So in order to do this within Google Cloud, there's a few things that we need to do. We need to provision a new GCS bucket. And then we need to make sure that all of the actual objects that we upload have public read permissions. And then finally, what we need to do is upload those objects. And we're going to do a couple of different things here that kind of show you the power of Paloomi and using TypeScript to actually do infrastructure as code. But let's start nice and straightforward. Let's actually provision our bucket. So what do we do to provision a new resource within Google Cloud? What we do is we create a variable in our language of choice, whether that be TypeScript or Python or Go. We create a variable and then we assign the value of a resource creation to that variable. So if you've used TypeScript before, this will seem pretty familiar. So we're going to declare a constant, and let's call it bucket. That seems like a good thing to call our bucket resource. And then what we're going to do is assign the value from the Google Cloud provider. So we do new GCP dot, and this is where I want to just take a quick moment here to show you what we get in terms of the value from using a standard TypeScript library. And this applies to all of Paloomi's different language SDKs, but by using a well-defined kind of type-safe language like TypeScript, we get all of this autocomplete from our IDE. If you are a software developer by trade rather than kind of maybe a DevOps engineer, or you've used IDEs in your past, this is super, super valuable because it means you have all this discoverability about Google Cloud directly from your IDE. And we know that we want to create a bucket. So let's just start typing and we should get storage. And then if I hit dot again, you can see these are all the different things I can do within the storage namespace within Google Cloud. So we know we want to create a bucket. So let's create a bucket, and then let's see what our IDE is telling us. What are the actual things that we need to pass to a bucket in order to create it? Well, we need a name, so the unique name of the resource. There's a set of arguments. And then there's some options, and you can see that we haven't finished rounding out our Google Cloud bucket. It's expecting 1 to 3 arguments, but we have 0 at the moment. So let's get this fixed to make sure that our bucket is actually going to work properly. So let's give it a name. I am going to call it website, and it needs to be a string. And then you can see I next need to provide some arguments, which is an arguments bag. And so what do we need to provide in the arguments? Well, we need to tell Google Cloud which location we're going to actually store this bucket in. So if I start typing location, you can see it gives me all of the different options that I need to specify. because it's TypeScript, it's given us it's telling us that that is optional. If we need it to be, we want to specify a location. So I'm going to do location is US. And I can examine this. I can go to the definition here for this bucket and actually look at all the different things that I need to actually specify. Again, this is just a this is just a this is just a standard TypeScript library. So you can see these are all the different things that I want to be able to specify, and you can see there's options in here as well. So like if we wanted to, we could specify some encryption options, and we could also specify the project directly, or we can say the requester pays, and all different kinds of things here. But you can hopefully get an idea that because this is just a standard TypeScript library, we can follow the same we can follow the same ideas within our software development lifecycle. And so I think this is super powerful, and it makes me, when I'm provisioning my infrastructure, it makes me way more productive when I'm actually provisioning stuff. So that's step one done, and let's, because we're good software developers, let's add a comment. Create Google GCP storage bucket in the US. And we need to round this out. Okay. The next thing that we want to do is specify a set of ACLs on this bucket, so that when we upload the files to the Google Cloud bucket, when they get uploaded, we need to make sure that they have, like, all users have access to them. Otherwise, when our users visit our static website, they're going to end up with they're going to end up with a request denied, and we don't want to do that because this is a static website. So let's create a new variable called ACL, and we'll do new gcp.storage dot default access control, default object access control. And so this is saying that when we're uploading our files, any file that gets uploaded to Google Cloud, to this Google Cloud bucket, should have this particular ACL added to it. And we're going to, again, give this a name, because every resource in Pulumi needs a name. And then we're going to look at the different arguments that we need to provide. And there are some required arguments for this particular resource. The bucket resource has no required arguments, so you didn't kind of see this error. But here, let's talk a little bit about what we're getting from our IDE here, right? If you've ever used another infrastructure as code tool, you might have noticed that the feedback loop for that infrastructure as code tool can be a little bit frustrating, because you might not know about the things that you've missed until you've already tried to provision something. With Paloomi, because we have this strongly typed API and these strongly typed SDKs, we can actually know which values are required and which values are not required. And so this is really, really useful. It gives you this much better feedback loop while you're defining your infrastructure. So I know before I even try and run this Paloomi program, then I need to actually populate some of these properties: the bucket, the entity, and the role. So I can be much more confident when I do go to provision my infrastructure that it is defined correctly, because the actual library itself is giving us that information. So let's give it what it needs to know. So we need to specify a role, and we're going to specify the reader role, and then we're going to specify an entity. So let's specify all users. And then finally, the thing that's missing, let's just have a look and make sure that the let's have a look here and see what the ID is telling us. It's telling us that the bucket is missing. And so that's the final thing that we need to populate. But I want to just take a moment and talk about what we're going to do here. So we're going to say bucket, like so. And then what we want to do is we want to assign this ACL to this bucket that we've created. And so what we need to do is specify the bucket name, but we don't want to hard code it. So what we don't want to do is do this, right? Because then Paloomi will not know the relationship between these two particular things, and it will create them in any order. What we actually want to do is tell this default access control resource that we want to use this particular bucket, right? So what we can do is we can use the variable. So bucket, like so, dot, and you can see what we're going to be provided with here is what we call Paloomi outputs. And this is when we create a GCP bucket, that API call has a bunch of responses, such as the name of the bucket created and whether encryption was enabled or whether the request to pays object was enabled. So what we do is we actually specify the name of the bucket from the actual bucket variable here. And what this will do is it creates the relationship between these two resources. This is what allows us to use an imperative language, as in TypeScript, and create declarative infrastructure, because we have these outputs that kind of get returned from the Pulumi API, and we can pass them to other resources to create a dependency graph between them. And this is really, really powerful because it means that you don't have to think about state storage. You don't have to think about the ordering of things. Pulumi takes care of all of that for you. So we created a default access control. The next part of the next part of this is that we need to actually upload our objects, right? So let's go and do that. Now, what I could do here is I could just say, I know what the files are that are in my www root directory here, but let's just get a little bit fancy with this and let's use a TypeScript loop in order to actually create resources. Because what I want to show you here is that you can be a lot more expressive than other infrastructure as code tools because we have the full power of TypeScript at our disposal. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an array of all the files. So index.html, let me scroll, there we go. Index.html and 404.html, like so. These are the two files that we want to upload to our static website. And so we created an array. If you are familiar with TypeScript, this should look pretty familiar. And then what we can do is use the map function to operate on every item in that array. This might be new to you if you are used to other infrastructure as code tools, because ultimately we get all of the power of TypeScript at our disposal. So what I'm going to do is type map, like so. And then what we're going to use is use the actual name of those files. So let's do name, like so. And then what we can do within this loop is we can actually use the new constructor to actually create a bucket object for each one of these files. So we can do new GCP. We scroll this down so we don't get the, there we go, GCP dot storage dot bucket object, and then we can specify the name as index.html, which is what our 404, and then like with our previous with our two previous examples, there are some required values here. So we need to make sure that we specify the bucket that we're going to upload our bucket object to, and if you are thinking about what we just did earlier, we could specify the actual bucket name. So we don't actually need to, we don't need to hard code that name. We can just get it as an output from our previous resource. And then we also need to specify the source of that bucket. This is an optional parameter, but we do need to specify the source. So let's do new Pulumi.asset.file archive. And then we need to specify the path to the actual file. And if we look at where this is in our directory, it's outside of my first GCP app and in www root. So what I'm going to do here is do up one level, www root /, and I can use string interpolation here for name, like so. And then finally, we're going to do something a little bit different here. We're actually going to hard code the name of this resource. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few moments. But what I'm going to do is specify the name property to the actual name from this loop here. So we're going to just kind of loop through we're going to loop through this array, and we're actually going to create a new bucket object with the name of index.html and 404.html, but we're also going to specify the name specifically. Now, you'll notice that we have a relationship between this bucket object and this bucket here, but we also need to make sure that we have this ACL created before these bucket objects get loaded. Because what will happen if we run this Paloomi program right now is that this is dependent on this. So it will create the bucket, and then it will create the default object access control for that bucket. and then there's a dependency between this bucket object and this bucket. So these two resources will happen at the same time. So it'll create the default object access control, and it will also create the bucket object at the same time, because those things can happen in parallel. What I have noticed when I kind of ran through this example is because these were happening at the same time, because this object access control wasn't available when the objects were uploaded, they were actually getting uploaded as private files rather than public files. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an explicit dependency between these bucket objects and this default object access control, like so. So I'm going to say depends on ACL, like so. Now, you only need to specify that something depends on another resource if there is no input that has an output from another resource. So we don't need to explicitly, as an example of this, we don't need to explicitly specify the bucket here. We don't need to do that, because you can see already there is already a dependency between the bucket and the bucket object name, and so it's going to do things in the right order. But if you do need a little bit more flexibility around your dependencies, you can use depends on, which is part of the options bag here. If there are any questions about that, then just drop them in the chat. I'm quite happy to explain a little bit more. But yeah, that's just allowing us to create the actual dependency between two different resources. Okay, one final step before we provision our static site. We need to know what the URL is going to be of our static site website. So we can do this using exporting constants from our project. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to export const URL equals Paloomi.interpolate. Why are we using Paloomi.interpolate? Well, let's finish this off, and then I'll talk a little bit about what Paloomi interpolate does. storage.google.api.com/bucket.name/index.html. So this is going to return to us a website URL at storage.googleapis.com with the bucket name in it and also a pending index.html at the end. Why are we using Paloomi.interpolate? Well, as I already mentioned to you, when we create our bucket, it goes to the API of the Google Cloud platform and creates a bucket. And it's going to create a bucket with a specific name. But Paloomi doesn't know what that name is going to be until that API response has come back from Google Cloud, right? And so what Paloomi interpolate is going to do is it's going to allow us to actually create this string with this already known value of, HTTP Google Storage APIs, but it's also going to allow us to insert the bucket name into here when that value is known. So it's basically saying, wait for the response from the API and then build this string. So let's comment this here so that we understand what's going on here. Build the URL when the bucket name is returned from the Google Cloud API, like so. So this is what Paloomi interpolate does. There is a blog post that I wrote that explains a little bit more about this. I'm just going to share this in the chat. It's called Understanding Paloomi's Apply. I would highly recommend reading through this to get an idea of what is actually happening. Paloomi interpolate is just a wrapper around what we call apply. So the same concepts apply to Paloomi interpolate, but hopefully that link will give you an idea of what's actually happening here. And it's just basically, to give a very brief summary, it's just basically saying, wait for something to happen and then do something. And that allows you to interpolate strings with eventual strings. So this is our static website. We've built it, it's up and running, it's ready to go. All we need to do now is we need to run Paloomi up to actually provision this infrastructure. So let's head back to my terminal. What I'm going to do is run Paloomi up. And I have an error. Excellent. Failed to compute archive hash www.index.html. What did I do? I used the wrong resource. So this is not a file archive. It is just a file. So let's go and fix it. So what happened there is I used file archive. I let my autocomplete get away with me, and it's trying to find an actual tarball or a zip file. So let's change this to file asset, like so. There we go. That looks much better. Let's run Pulumi up. There we go. That looks a lot like it. So you can see it's going to create some resources here. You can see it's going to create a website bucket and a default access control and a bucket object of 404 HTML and index.html. And I can take a look at the details here. And you can see it's it looks pretty good. Let's take a look at what the actual website name is going to be, though. So the actual bucket that we've created, we called it website, right? But it added this random string on the end here. Why did Paloomi do that? The reason that it does that is that a lot of cloud providers, their APIs are immutable. Like you can't replace certain resources. So in order to allow you to do things like blue-green deploys, Pulumi will automatically append these values here to the end of different resources, unless you specify a name explicitly, which is what we did for the name of the files itself. So we explicitly said that we want it to be called index.html because we don't want to have index.html dash a bunch of random strings for our website. So we actually explicitly specified a name. You can override Palumi's auto naming on a per resource basis. So using a random string for the bucket is totally okay, but using a random string for the actual index website is definitely not. So we've seen both examples of that. So what we're going to do is just hit yes. And you can see, notice the order that happened in. It happened pretty quickly, but notice the order that it happened in. It created the bucket, and then it created the default object access control because the bucket, so this resource, the default object access control relies on the bucket. And then once that had created, because we have this explicit depends on here, it created the bucket object after the object access control was created. So that should mean that we should be able to access our website. So I'm going to copy this URL here, and I'm going to take it to my browser, and I'm going to do this. Excellent. We have a working website on a Google Cloud bucket, but our website doesn't really work properly because how can you have a server address and a host name on a static website? This isn't really what we want from our little sample application. We actually want these values to be populated. So that's why in a few moments, I'm just going to take a quick pause, but in a few moments, we're going to upload this as a Docket image and run it in Google Cloud Run instead. Thanks for letting us know that if you're depending on the way you authenticate to Google Cloud, you may need to run gcloud auth application default login before you actually. Our Google Cloud account is just a sandbox, so depending on what happens there. It looks like the question that Paul, it looks like your Google Cloud account does not allow. It looks like somebody has set some policy on your account that doesn't allow you to publish objects from a bucket. So that looks like a configuration issue at your Google Cloud level. What you might want to do just to actually get this working properly, Paul, is just don't specify an ACL, and that it won't let you actually view the website, but it will allow you to actually complete your Pulumi program. And so you might just want to comment this out like so, and then comment this out. That should allow you to get to a place where your provisioning request runs, that doesn't look like, it does look to me like there is a totally understandable policy within your organization that does not allow you to expose files from a bucket, which is a very good security policy. But obviously for this particular example, that's obviously going to be a problem. So I do apologize for that. Hopefully the next step, you'll be able to get this running. Okay, so we already mentioned our website is not doing what we expect it to do. So in order to fix this, let's go and create a new resource. So what we're going to do now is, let's just take a look at this file again. So in our www, what we're going to do is we're going to use this Docker file and we're going to build it using Pulumi. We're going to build this and we're going to actually upload it to a GCR image. And then we're also going to upload it and run it in Google Cloud Run. So we need to add an additional dependency to our Pulumi project before we do that. We need to install the Docker provider. And again, we've already done this with Google Cloud. We're going to run npm install at Pulumi/Docker, like so. And it's already installed for me, so you may see a little bit more feedback and output. So this will allow us to actually build Docker images locally. Before you do continue, I would highly recommend making sure Docker is running. So you can see I have a bunch of Docker images built locally. So run like a Docker images Docker info is what I'm looking for. Just make sure you have Docker running locally. I have run this workshop before and completely forgot to start the Docker client. So just make sure you actually have Docker running. So Docker info should return a successful, successfully, basically. Okay, and of course, don't forget to install the Docker provider as well. So make sure that's installed in your environment as well. And again, you should be able to verify that it's there in our package.json, like so, at Paloomi Docker, like so. And as with our GCP provider, the next thing that we need to do is actually import that library. So import all as Docker from at Paloomi Docker, like so. So just do that at the top to make sure that we're actually able to build our Docker image. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the next lab. So let's go back to my web browser real quick. You are here. You've run your Pulumi up and you have your created files. So we're going to move on to lab 3, which is deploy with Docker. So what are we going to do here? We're going to build the Docker image using the Pulumi Docker provider. And then we're going to configure a Cloud Run service to actually run that image. And we're going to do it in the same project just to keep things nice and simple. So we're going to provision this same application twice. You may need to run this command to actually make sure that Docker can talk to Google Cloud, because we're going to be using the Docker API locally. So we'll need to run gcloud auth docker login. I think that's what it is. Configure Docker. Gcloud auth configure Docker, like so. And it should tell you that you have credential helpers for gcr.io of gcloud. And what that does is it allows us to build our Docker image and then push it to our GCR repository. We're going to do this in Paloomi, but it is going to use the Docker API. So make sure you've kind of run that little command there. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at the end of our Paloomi project. Let me get rid of this. And we're going to create a Docker image. And because we're using TypeScript, we can do a lot of variable. We can use it. We can declare a variable. So let's do const image name equals my first GCP app, like so. And then we're going to create an image variable, very similar to what we did with our other resources for our static website. But instead of using the GCP provider, we're going to do new docker.image example. And again, we're going to get some information from our IDE that says that we are missing some required options. So we need to specify an image name, and then we also need to specify some build information. So let's go ahead and do that. Image name. We're going to need to use Pulumi interpolate here because we're going to push this Docket image to our Google Cloud project. And you'll need to make sure that you have this Google Cloud project configured like you did before. So let's do Pulumi.interpolate gcr.io/gcp.config.project. So we're actually grabbing, if you remember earlier, we did a Google, we actually configured the name of the project that we're going to use. Each project within Google Cloud has a GCR image repository set up already. So we can just grab this value directly from our configuration and actually not have to hard code anything at all, which I think is super nice, because what that means is that if we were to create a new stack, we can just rerun this over and over again. And then I'm also going to specify the image name, like so. And then we need to specify a tag. I'm just going to call it latest for now, just to kind of keep it simple. You might consider calling this version 1.0.0, but I'm just going to call it latest. We're still getting errors from our IDE because we have not specified anything to build. So we specified the name of our Docker image, but we haven't actually specified an image name, a build, anything to build when we build this Docker image. So let's specify it. Let's specify build, like so. And then we need to say that the context, i.e. the Docker image that we want to build, is in the www root folder, which is one level above. So we're going to do upper level www root. Like so. So this is actually going to look, when we run our Paloomi program, it's going to look in this directory for a Docker file, and if it finds one, it's going to build it, and hopefully it will find it because it's definitely there. So we're going to specify that like so, and then hopefully in a second when we run our Paloomi up, it will go and build that image, and it will push it to it will automatically push it to our GCR repository, like so. Okay, now that we specified an image that we want to run and it's been pushed to GCR, the next thing that we want to do is actually tell Google's Cloud Run to run this image. So using the same familiar pattern that we've already used, let's create a value called container, a variable called container, and then we can go back to our GCP provider. So GCP dot cloud run dot service, like so. We'll call this web app for now. And then we need to specify a bunch of different options here. So we're going to specify a name for the container, and we're going to give it a hard-coded name in this particular situation, rather than let auto name take care of it. Google's Cloud Run likes to have specific names, so we're just going to specify, we're going to hard code the name of web app. And then we need to specify a location. And I'm going to run mine in US Central 1. And then we need to specify a template. So the template is things like what the image name is going to be, some specification. So let's populate this. Let's get it all populated. So template, spec. And inside the spec, we have an array of containers that we want to run. By the way, if you don't want to type all this out, it is in the lab here, so you can just copy and paste this if you want. I'm going to type it out because I want everybody to make sure that they see the process. But if you don't want to type this out, then please feel free to copy and paste it. So what do we need to specify in containers? We need to specify an image. And of course, using our dependency graph, we can actually specify the image.image name. So again, this is going to create dependency between a dependency graph between our Google Cloud service and our image, because we're doing an output from image into our Cloud Run, into our Cloud Run service. We also need to specify some ports, like so. So we're going to say container port, and we know it's Nginx, so we know it's going to run on port 80 because it's a web server. So let's specify the container port of 80. And then we need to specify some request limits. And I don't want anybody to get charged any money here, so we're going to make these really small resource limits. So let's make it requests is a tiny amount of memory, so 64 megabits, CPU 200M, and then limits let's do upper bound limits of 256 MI, and then CPU 1000 M. So that's just probably just about one core. So that's fleshed out our Google Cloud resource. There's one last thing that we need to specify in our specification here. We just need to say how many concurrent requests we want to serve. I think I looked this up before. 80 is the upper limit for concurrent requests for the free tier. So I'm going to specify that as 80, like so. I'll take a pause there because there's a lot to type out. If anybody's having any problems, just jump into the chat. Oh, I just noticed, Paul, that you're having the same error. It looks like it does look like there's some corporate policy there. Again, it's a totally understandable corporate policy, but it looks like that might be what you're running into. What I would recommend is just kind of yank all of this stuff, all of the bucket stuff. Hopefully the Google Cloud stuff the Cloud Run stuff will go a little bit smoother. Okay. Don't forget to close that out. Okay, final thing. We need to allow unrestricted access from the public to actually look at our Google Cloud container. So our Cloud Run container. So we're going to use an IAM member resource for this. So let's do const IAM equals new gcp.cloudrun.IAM member website. And this has a bunch of dependencies. So let's have a look what our ID is telling us. We have some IAM member mobs. We need a member, a role, and a service. So let's specify our service, container.name. Again, creating these dependencies between these resources. We know that our location is US Central 1 because we already specified it. And we also want to specify a role. So we're going to do run.invoker. I'm not going to pretend to understand Google's naming policy for these roles. This is just the one that I managed to get it working using. And then we want all users like so. Paul, you may run into another problem here because this is very, very permissive. And it may be that your Google Cloud policy does not allow this. Do apologize for that. I do understand not everybody has the benefits of a sandbox account at their disposal where they can kind of do a bunch of testing. Hopefully you're getting some value out of this, even if you are getting errors that are kind of enforced by your policy. Okay, so what we've done is we're building a Docker image. We're running it in Cloud Run. And then we're going to specify that anybody who visits that Cloud Run URL can actually view the URL. The final thing that we need to do is we need to export the actual URL that we're going to use. These these constants are unique, so we're going to give this another name. We're going to do export const container URL equals container dot statuses. And statuses is an array, so we're going to use the first element in the array, and then we're going to specify the URL. So this will, again, it will export our URL for our Cloud Run container and allow us to actually visit it and actually look at our running application. Okay, I'm just going to hit save, make sure everything's saved, and then let's run Paloomi up again. Let's see what we get here. Create. It's building our image. So you can see in the background, it's built a Docker image. Yours may take a little bit longer than mine because I already built this Docker image earlier when I was practicing. So it's just going to build your Docker image. Let's look a little. You'll see that our container output, our container URL is not known yet because that's going to get returned from the Google Cloud API. So it's going to tell you that it will eventually have a container URL, but we don't know what it is yet, so it's still not populated. I want to draw your attention to another thing as well. We've updated our existing Pulumi program, and we already have a static website in here. We already have a bunch of resources in here. It's only creating the resources that have been added since I've updated my Pulumi program. So it's only going to do the things that it needs to do. We're using an imperative language, but we're still getting a declarative result. This is the power of the Paloomi engine. This is the power of the Paloomi resource graph. So you can write this imperative code and Paloomi will magically turn it into declarative. It's incredibly powerful, and it will allow you to be really, really iterative. So you can build out your Paloomi projects over time and do things over time, and then when you run it in its final form, it will create everything. So let's perform this update. Let's run it. Let's see what happens. Building image, pushing to gcr.io/lbreaks, pushing those image layers. And you'll notice, of course, because we've created the dependency between the Cloud Run service and the actual IAM member, that it didn't start creating the Cloud Run service until the image was created. So the dependencies are actually building between them. And you can see my image push succeeded. My Cloud Run service has been created. And then my IAM member has been created. And we have got our Cloud Run URL has been returned. I'm going to grab this URL. I'm going to be fancy instead of copying it. And I'm going to do pb copy. And then I'm going to head to my web browser. And the moment of truth. Look at that. We have a valid date, we have a valid server name, and we have a valid server address, even though it is a linked local address. And you can also notice the request IP is working correctly. How does the dependency work with build of the Docket image and running it with Cloud Run? Okay, that's a great question, Anish. So what's happened, right, is we have specified an image name of gcr.io, like a remote. We've specified a name of a remote image repository. So the way the dependency works is that this Docker image resource is going to build an image locally and then push it to a remote image registry. And the outputs, the actual image, this image name here that we have created doesn't get returned from the Docker API until all of those processes have finished, right? So if you think about the steps that are being taken here, it's going to do Docker build, Docker push, and then when that push finishes, that push will return an image name with the actual remote URL. And that's how the dependency gets created, because it doesn't actually return this image name until this has been finished creating. And that's how the dependencies get created. Hopefully that gives you an idea. It's mainly like if we hadn't specified a remote image repository here, if we hadn't specified that, the dependencies would not work, or at least it wouldn't, like the actual build wouldn't work, because it would still wait for that image to be pushed. But then the actual Cloud Run service would still wait until that image has been pushed. But if we pushed it to a different URL, as an example, it would probably fail to start. So hopefully that gives you an idea. Can we reference location from Cloud Run block in the IAM block? Let's find out, shall we? Location. I don't actually know the answer, so let's find out. Container dot. Oh no, it's image. No, it's not. It is IAM member block. So what we're going to do is we're going to specify the location is container. So the actual answer is, if there is an output, look at that. Yes, we can. Let's try that, shall we? That's a great question. Thank you very much, Anish. So let's specify the location here instead of hard coding it. Look at that. I'm learning things today. And then we're going to rerun our Paloomi up. We should see no changes here because the location is still the same, but we've just specified it as an output. So we're getting this warning error because my Docker environment is not configured properly, but you'll notice there's no changes here. So the answer to your question is absolutely yes. I'm actually going to update this workshop to make this, use this output here, because this is a much better way of doing things. So thank you very much for the great question, Anish. And then the fact that you asked that question is giving me hope that the understanding of how this works is kind of coming across. Yeah, that was a really, really awesome question. So what we're going to do now, the final thing that we're going to do is I'm going to destroy all this stuff. So I'm going to run Pulumi destroy. And you can see it's going to tear all this stuff down, like so. So going to delete the IAM member, delete the bucket object, just to make sure these things don't stay running. You don't have to do this, but I just want to show you an example of what happens. We've destroyed all our infrastructure. I'm going to run Paloomi up, yes. Because we've destroyed all our infrastructure, it's going to recreate everything. But notice it's going to build the Docker image and the bucket, all those things. Like, it's going to create these things in parallel, because there's no dependency between these storage objects and these image objects. They're two different dependency graphs. So this speeds up our image, our push. It doesn't do things it doesn't do things in the order in our program. It does things in an order that it needs to do things. So if there's no dependency between these things, it will just go ahead and create them. So we should get two new URLs here any minute now, once this Cloud Run service is finished creating. It's taking longer than I expected. Well, I guess something has happened with my Cloud Run service at this point. I don't know what's going on there. Oh, no, there it is. Just took a little bit longer than I expected. The joy of cloud providers, you see. You just never know what's going to happen. So you can see we should have two new URLs now. We got a new website bucket. So there's a different URL, but that shows you the repeatability of the repeatability of this infrastructure as code mechanism. We've just recreated all of our infrastructure with a single Paloomi up, and we can do this over and over and over again. Which is what you really want from your infrastructure as code, right? You want to be able to repeat things and do them over and over again. So that's just over an hour. That's all we have time for today. If you did enjoy this workshop, we have other workshops coming up. We're going to get the schedule taken care of pretty soon. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I hope you got some. I hope this was an informative, an informative workshop. I usually send out a poll here, and I was a little bit unorganized this morning. Didn't get a chance to put the poll together. But if you did enjoy this workshop, please let us know. We have the Paloomi community Slack at slack.paloomi.com. Please feel free to join us. Slack.paloomi.com. If you are new to Pulumi, I am at Briggsell on Twitter, or you can tweet our public Pulumi Corp handle. If you need any help with the kind of getting started with Pulumi, then please let us know. But we'll call it a day there. Hopefully everybody had a great time and learned a lot about infrastructure as code with TypeScript. We do have other workshops coming up, and we have lots and lots of content on our website for different languages. So if you would prefer to use Python or Go or .NET instead of TypeScript, all those things are available as well. Thanks very much, everybody. It was really great chatting with you all today. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.